Everyone, it's Rick and thanks for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. It's a hot summer day in the Northeast, 80 degrees, the sun is shining and the temp's going up. So enjoying the late morning while we can be outside comfortably walking. I wanted to spend some time with you all talking about complex problem solving and the approach that we take and how easy it is to be off the mark, both in terms of how we take a stepwise investigatory approach and also how easy it is to just fragment our approach to particular settings where, for example, at work, we'll say, well, we have to be problem solvers, in the work environment for particular projects, but in other settings, we don't necessarily apply those principles. And so you have both sort of a methodology lapse or approach that's partial, that's fragmented, and also, it's very interesting to see how when one talks about team and the principles of collaboration, how easy it is to fall away from shared understanding and really looking at what's going on from a joint perspective. So I wanted to share an experience that I had in the past couple of weeks where I was in a meeting with some of my colleagues, and we were talking about precision problem solving, the approach that my team takes in complex problem solving in healthcare, where our mantra or our approach is always to say shared understanding before action, and the importance of really understanding current state and taking a open approach, an open inquiry approach, without making any kind of assumptions as to what actually is going on. And so we were talking about that, and it was, I think, resonating as an idea with the group, and we were just talking about what potential opportunities there might be to expand that methodology, precision problem solving, in settings where that might not be the case, which is most settings. And we moved on to having dinner together, and we're having just conversation about or around different topics. And ultimately, because we're all in healthcare, we landed back in healthcare talking about our challenging environment and the limitations that persist in all of these areas that we're trying to make improvements and to get out of really a crisis, I would say. And ultimately, we were talking about the payers, the insurance companies, how certain models, were, to some people's perspective, more valuable, beneficial than others. We were talking about Medicare, and we were talking about commercial payers and Medicaid and health system insurance coverages in other countries, sort of a more socialized view, universal health care. And everybody was opining, making assumptions, kind of stating their point of view, and professing their expertise and trying to convince others that their perspective was correct. And I spent most of that conversation just listening and reflecting on how the conversation that we had had in our meeting had totally fallen by the wayside, and everybody was in the standard mode of articulating what they think is going on and what they think should be. And the result was really no resolution, just essentially sharing perspectives and no meaningful outcome. So, what's the point of sharing this? Well, I think, again, kind of coming back to what I wanted to point out earlier, observe how easy it is for us to have an idea and to be able to articulate it very clearly based on principles, and how easy it is for us not to apply it because it's a what should be. It's an idea, not a fact. And as long as we're in the space of conversation and pointing to a direction that we should take, we're not actually observing how we actually problem solve or how we actually approach our daily lives. So when you look at that specific example around just the health insurance conversation, the question, even if it isn't openly asked or articulated, is for them, what's the best health insurance coverage that can get us out of our healthcare woes in the US, or at least play a big role in that. And immediately everybody has their point of view, and it's not a question of whether it's correct or not. The fact that there are different point of views tells you a couple of things. One is that probably nobody is exactly right, and that the reason there are multiple points of view is because we actually don't understand what the needs are for health coverage fully, right? We have a lot of contradictions and a lot of different conflicts of interest, if you will, that prevent us from actually seeing what could be a solution and ultimately serve to get us back on course. So with that in mind, when you think about asking the right question, it becomes really important to ask the right question to engage in conversations like this. And rather than saying what is or how should we, maybe a more pertinent question, a more investigatory question is essentially to ask, what are the issues and concerns related to covering healthcare needs? And now all of a sudden you've kind of pulled it back and you've opened the space for everybody to share their perspective on whatever it is that they feel strongly about in the context of sharing and listening. And, a follow-up question that probably is even part of this is even to take one step higher and to ask, what exactly is the healthcare coverage that we're trying to achieve? What does it mean to have exceptional or great healthcare coverage? And those are much tougher questions, right? But they're also ones that open up the floor and open up the space to really take a much deeper look to what really is the underlying issue, and to explore what those elements are and what those themes are, so that you don't get caught in models that are out there and clearly are not functioning the way that they should or the way that they're intended. Doesn't matter where you are. So think about that, not only in the context of work, but think about how we are very good at taking ideas and perhaps even applying them in certain settings, but most of the time just talking about them, following the mantra, do as I say, not as I do, and how easy it is for us to compartmentalize and to just fall back into the routine for problem solving that essentially we all have learned, and that if you look around on the planet, in politics, or anywhere else in daily lives, personal relationships. We're always kind of taking it from our own point of view of what we think should be and what we think is and what we think should be. And we just end up running around in circles. And basically we're in conflict. So that's it for today. Again, there's nothing to do other than to observe how you participate in that, how we all as individuals participate in these types of conversations or in these types of problem-solving exercises, and how easy it is to fall off and basically to start with the wrong question. And a lot of times, the question actually redirects and guides the team or even oneself to looking at things in a much broader, holistic view. So I hope everybody has a great day, a wonderful week, and I look forward to next time. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Take care.